Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Pathfinder, the leading digital media company in the space industry. I'm your host, Mo Islam, and my guest today is Matt Gialich, co-founder and CEO of AstroForge, an LA-based startup focused on developing and deploying technologies that allow for the extraction of precious metals from near-Earth asteroids. In other words, asteroid mining. This is Matt's second time on the show, but fresh off of a $40 million funding round, we've decided to bring him back to hear about the progress and what investors are excited about. Matt, welcome back to the show. Glad to have you.
Thanks for having me on again, Mo. Appreciate it.
And congrats on the funding announcement.
Yeah, thank you. It's obviously it's a pretty cool milestone to have an asteroid mining company, raise a Series A, and now we're off to the races.
Well, I will admit that I was surprised by the number because that is not a small Series A, and I definitely want to talk a little bit more about it. But before we jump into the details, just to give everyone a refresher, tell us a little bit about AstroForge. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, AstroForge, obviously, we're an asteroid mining company, right? Our mission in life is to go out and mine platinum group metals from a very specific type of near-Earth asteroid. And that's what we want our mission to be, and that's what we want to do. Obviously, there's a lot of reasons we can dive into on why you might care. But I think the real reason, just to bring this home, is keep in mind, these metals I talk about, these platinum group metals, which are 6 elements, use in everyday things that you might not realize. I mean, if you're watching me, the screen you're watching this on probably has 3 of the 6 platinum group elements in it. Like, these are everyday useful things that we need, and we just don't have enough on Earth. So that's the big, giant mission of AstroForge. That's what we want to do. At our core, we're a mining company. We just think the best, highest grade ore is in space.
Got it. Okay. Well, simply said. So I guess let's take a step back before we talk about the complexities of asteroid mining. But you mentioned platinum group metals. What are they? So what are those metals? And maybe talk a little bit more about how important they are. And, clearly there's somewhat of a supply issue here. Otherwise, why would we go off Earth to mine these metals?
Yeah, I mean, look, the platinum group metals, it's platinum, iridium, palladium. You can go through them all. Look, these 6 elements, they have very high melting points, which is the number one thing. But number 2 is they just have a whole bunch of unique properties as elements that we can use. And so to talk a little bit more about what they go in, like the NVIDIA H100, right? This AI chip that everybody loves to talk about in the AI world, uses 4 of the 6 platinum group metals. Like it's a critical element needed to make every microprocessor, every piece of electronics you use. And without it, our modern way of life doesn't exist. We also have the use case here. Electric cars use it all over the place, but so do gas cars. Your catalytic converter uses 3 of the 6 platinum group metals at high rates to reduce emissions. Like, they're huge catalysts in reducing emissions. It's something very critical for our way of life as we go through. And then, on the medical side too, if, God forbid you've ever had anybody with cancer, one of the still classical ways we treat cancer is with direct platinum therapy. I have no idea. I'm not a medical doctor. I have no idea why this works. But you literally eat platinum, and it helps you as a part of cancer treatments as we go forward. So these metals are used all over, but also, don't take my word. I'm a founder. I'm going to tell you all the good cases we have of them. Just go look at the markets. There's a reason these things are worth a lot of money, and it's because the supply and demand curves are out of whack. They've been out of whack for a long time, and we just don't have the platinum group metal ore deposits that we want. In fact, in the United States, we have less than 2% of the world's ore, and it's really only platinum and palladium, and it's in a mine in Montana called Stillwater. Almost all the platinum group ore we have is in South Africa, and that's a huge problem for us in the free world as we go forward, right? South Africa, China, and Russia really control this resource as a whole. And so how do we do it? Well, it's not something you can synthesize in a lab at any quantity or you can make up, right? Like, this is a raw elemental material. We've known about it on asteroids for a long time, and that's why we think it's the best approach to go after.
So is the desire to start the company, and we'll get to your background in a second, is the desire to start the company based on a bigger mission beyond just platinum group metal mining? Or was it more like, hey, this is a very interesting, or is it, all right, well, let me take a step back. Was your sort of perspective like, hey, I want to figure out a way to mine asteroids? The clearest business case today is these platinum group metals. But really, there's this bigger kind of picture, vision behind the company. Or is it purely kind of economical? Hey, I've noticed that there's this mining imbalance here in the US. And, oh, by the way, I read somewhere that, there's a lot of these metals on an asteroid somewhere. So let me figure out how to build a company to do that.
No, it's way worse than all those things you just said, Mo. I give you the real reason why. And as founders, you have to look, for any business, you better have a big ass market you're going after. You better have high margins. Make sure you check all the business boxes. And I think we do in every instance of the word. But that's not what I care about, right? What I care about is actually, this goes all the way back to me and Jose when we were working at Bird Rides, the scooter company, right? We were talking about our job offers to go to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and work on Europa Clipper. And simply sitting there and saying, like, how do you make Europa Clipper cost $5 billion? How is that even possible? Like, what do you have to do to make a spacecraft cost that much? And it's pretty clear when you go through it, like, gold mylar isn't that expensive. Aluminum that is built on isn't that expensive. Like, what are we missing here? And I think what we're missing is a massive amount of government overhead that you go into it. But also there's another critical thing we realized is that a lot of what makes deep space so expensive is direct insertion rocket launches. That means you have to buy the whole rocket. You can't take advantage of rideshare. You can't do these cheaper launches. Like, you own the whole rocket. And if you're looking at something like a Delta IV and Atlas V, those were $400 million. Now you're talking about a Falcon Heavy or a Falcon 9. You're still close to $100 million. And you'd be an absolute idiot to buy a rocket for $100 million and launch a $2 million satellite. So we thought, you can build these satellites very cheap, but you can't launch them. Well, me and Jose still know a lot of people at SpaceX, and we started talking to them, right? We still meet them all the time. We realized that NASA's doing these lunar missions called Eclipse missions. Well, Eclipse missions are a 1,000-kilogram payload that they put at the top, right? That's what, like, the Nova Sea landers, Intuitive Machines is going to do. What the hell are you going to do with the rest of the mass on the Falcon? You can probably sell it to a couple people, right? There's going to be a couple things out of JPL or some scientific missions that care about going to the moon. But for the most part, nobody cares about the moon. There's not an economic reason to go to the moon. So we realized, hold on, we can buy these kind of rocket slots for a lot cheaper. How cheap can we get them? And I think I'm bound by the contract to not say the price point, or I would. But I'll just tell you this, it's a lot cheaper. And now we can build a spacecraft very, very cheap and get access to deep space for very cheap. What can you do? That was actually how the company started, was kind of a clean slate of, okay, we think deep space is now accessible and cheap. What does this mean? What can you do with it? I went all the way as far as having the idea of, one of the ideas I ran by Jose in the very early days was, could we do flybys of Mars and Jupiter and like sell advertisements at the bottom? Could I put like sponsored by Coca-Cola at the bottom? And, Jose in the classic was like, this is the stupidest idea I've ever heard of, which he was completely correct. As we went through, but asteroid mining was one of those ideas. And as we went through and iterated on it, then it became, okay, we see this kind of hole in the market we can take advantage of. What can we do? And what can make a lot of money, and what has good margins, and what is actually needed on the Earth as we go forward, right? And realistically, what we came up with was mining platinum on asteroids is the best viable business we can think of in deep space for today. There's obviously a lot of viable businesses in deep space that I hope come to fruition, being multiplanetary, feeding an in-space economy, kind of all these things. But as of today, those markets are zero. And kind of my thought when me and Jose started this was, actually what I told him is, look at the last year. If there wasn't any sales in that in the last year, it's not a market we can look at. And that's how we built the company.
Got it. Okay. Well, you mentioned, you did mention Bird to JPL. Talk to me a little bit about that. So before even AstroForge, so it sounds like the two of you guys were at Bird together. And if I'm hearing you correctly, you both also received some type of, you both received offers to go work at JPL. Maybe give me a little bit more about
so I started off as a company. I'll skip a little bit of bullshit, but I worked for a long time at a company called Virgin, what became Virgin Orbit, building Launcher One. And when I was at Virgin, we got to a point where it's right before first launch, we had kind of the rocket figured out, and it really became a lot of conversations about manufacturing rockets. And I'll tell you, if there's one thing that bores the shit out of me, it's manufacturing rockets. Like, I don't care. I'm sure a lot of people care. For me, didn't give a shit at all. So I literally Googled what is the fastest growing company in the world. And the fastest growing company in the world at that time was a scooter company called Bird Rides. So I said, cool, let me go. How do I get a job here? I got a job at Bird Rides working on what would become the Bird 2 scooter, which is probably the best looking design scooter you've ever seen. And also is total garbage to ride. Like, if you ever see a Bird 2 on the street, just don't even ride it. It hurts. It's not comfortable. But I started there, and when I was there, we had someone I worked with at Virgin had gone to JPL, and they were trying to recruit me to JPL to work on Europa Clipper. And I knew that Jose, he had mentioned, I'm also trying to recruit Jose. So I got my job off from JPL, and I went and found Jose at Bird. I said, like, hey, dude, have you ever thought about going and doing this? And Jose had said what I knew deep down was the truth. Absolutely not. Like, this is a really cool mission, really fun, but this mission is going to be 28 years long. It's a retirement job. Like, I'm just not ready to retire in space and take zero risk. And that's what JPL is all about. And I think there's a huge subset of people that want to go do that and want to be slower and want to kind of be very methodical. That's not two startup guys that want to like roll the dice every step of the way and take high risk. And so I just knew deep down that going there was going to lead to failure. And my wife jokingly said, like, if you take this job, I'm divorcing you because I know you're just going to be looking for another job in 6 months. Like, please don't do this. But it really catalyzed something in me to go take a leap of faith and go think about starting a company and go jump off the deep end and do it. And it did catalyze into me actually starting a submarine company, totally off the wall, totally something different. I was not the CEO, I was CTO. I'll skip a lot of the details here, but I became CEO. We got into Y Combinator as the submarine company. And then, right before YC started, like, Michael Seibold called me and said, what are you doing? Like, you don't care about submarines. You guys are talking about rocket launches in your chat. You have this guy who's not a co-founder at your company, and Jose, like, why is he, what are you doing? And had this kind of like heart-to-heart conversation with me very late at night. And it changed everything. And I pivoted the company to asteroid mining, made Jose a full co-founder, and we were off to the races.
I assume since you're telling me this story, your wife is still with you?
As of right now, she is.
Okay. I was debating whether I should ask the question, but I figured why not roll the dice.
We're three kids in, so I think we're locked in for at least another 10 years.
You're locked in. You're locked in. Okay, let's talk. So asteroid mining it's a part of the industry that has historically been bucketed into the science fiction, right? And it's the throwaway term that a lot of investors use when they talk about industries that they or subsectors that they don't want to invest in the space, or they don't. I'm not saying anything I'm sure haven't heard. And obviously, when you look at the history of companies, there's businesses like the one that comes to mind, which is the famous one, Planetary Resources, that didn't work out. So could you, for a second, and I've asked this question to you before, but maybe tell me a little bit about what didn't make those businesses work. At the end of the day, was the cost of launch, and then two, who do you consider your competitors today in this sort of new era?
Yeah, I think that. So first off, asteroid mining comes off as soon as look, I've said this before when I pitch investors. The first word I say is asteroid mining, and then the rest of the deck is to convince them that I'm not high on drugs, right? Like, that's it. It has to be very non-scientific to do. I guess a couple of things here. I want to be clear. We've done asteroid mining before. Like, governments have done it. JAXA with Hayabusa 1 and 2, NASA with OSIRIS-REx. We've gone out to asteroids. We've taken pieces of them and we brought it back to Earth. This isn't a physics problem. This is more a problem of, can you do it for a price point that makes any sense? And when it comes to a company like Planetary Resources, look, they had a lot of really, really smart people at Planetary Resources. But the reality was it was very early. And the whole funding of the space environment was in a very different place. The ability to kind of take a high-tech job, which we call deep tech now, right? Very different than like the software world, and apply those kind of early stage venture-backed company motives to a deep tech company hadn't really iterated out and existed. Like, I'm not building this from scratch, right? I can read a whole bunch about how other people have done things, really understand funding. Going through YC helped a bunch. But also, I think there's one critical thing here, which I mentioned is, when Warren Buffett looks at a business, he looks at a business and he says, you got to really have two things, right? You have to have a big moat and you got to have a big market. And like, that's kind of what I believe. And Mo, I'm sure you hear a lot about these space companies that go out there and they say, like, we're going to do X. And you say, okay, cool. Where's the market for X? And they'll say, well, it's going to be $1 trillion. And I was like, okay, great. What was it last year? And that's always my gut check. What was the market last year? That's all I base a company off of. And so for us, it really is going into how big is that actual market? And then how do we protect ourselves from that market, right? And the biggest thing we did that we spent a lot of resources at this company is the refinery. We have a pretty awesome refinery at this point. It's a very low power way to take an asteroid and turn it into the PGMs. It's really cool to look at. It's also pretty dangerous to look at. But obviously, seeing this system work to remove material is a big thing. So that's probably the first way that we're different than Planetary Resources. The second way is just the macro picture. There was no CLIPS program. There was no high energy deep space launches that you could go do. And so if we look at when Peter and Chris and both the Chris's started Planetary Resources and went off, they had the option of a Delta IV and Atlas V. those are $400 million a piece. If you're going to have price parity to satellite, you're not looking at $800 million for them to launch their first deep space mission. We've been pretty vocal about saying ours in total is less than 7. It's just a totally different picture to go raise. And we're taking a lot of risks. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying mission number 2 has a 100% chance it's going to make it to an asteroid and grab these beautiful pictures. No, it's probably a lot less than that. But we have that choice to make. They could never make that choice because they had to raise $1 billion to just do a first demonstrator. I think that fundamentally, at the end of the day, just makes those proof points that investors want to see and people want to see to make it more real, just not obtainable. And so from that perspective, it's a very, very different picture for them.
So you mentioned you look at the market last year, right? And that's your kind of that's your benchmark. Can you give us a sense of how large the PGM market is today? How much dollars gets transacted here?
Yeah, this has been a lot of R&D and reading about commodities markets for me because it's a very interesting different path, right? So I guess number one, I will say all the numbers you can look up here are going to be different, but they're kind of going to go into some kind of grouping that maybe you can draw some analogies for. But a lot of platinum group metals go through London. That's where the commodities exchange here. And I'm just going to round up a little bit. It's a little less than this, but it's about $60 billion a year in commodities get transacted through London, right? So we know that about $60 billion worth of platinum group metals are used in manufacturing use cases or are bought by companies per year through London. If we look at something like elasticity of commodities, it's around 10%. So just assume that means we could bring back about $6 billion a year before we start to really affect the supply and demand. That's probably the number one question I get asked. Like, what happens if you screw up the whole platinum group metal markets, right? How do you fix that? So I guess $6 billion a year, I'll put it in startup terms in ARR. Sounds pretty damn good to me. But still, there is probably a limit there. The other thing we did here is I just said, cool, I don't know what any of that means. Can I just go get contracts? Like, let me just go see if people actually give me binding contracts to this. So at this point, we have right around $8 billion in binding contracts for AstroForge. Now, they're always funny contracts.
Sorry, he said billion?
Yeah, we have about $8 billion in contracts.
And these contracts, I assume, are if you deliver metals to us at this price point, we are a buyer of X dollars or X pounds or whatever unit you use to measure them.
Yes, it's always, they're like the stupidest contracts in history, right? They're like, we will buy platinum from you if you bring it to our doorstep. Yeah. My bigger point of getting contracts was, number one, because I always get a laugh out of people when I say, like, we're now a post-Series A company that has $8 billion in contracts. That's not really important. I'm sure you could also, sell contracts to a time machine. The difficulty is delivering on the time machine, right?
Yeah,
as we go. But it was really important for me to understand what that back end looked like. Most platinum group metals seem to be traded over the counter. They never go through London. They're never recorded in this way. In fact, some of the people we talked to essentially told us, we have contracts on the back end that are much, much larger than this. We could take as much as you guys wanted to give us. There's not a problem here on metal, right? There's a problem here on supply. And so that was really helpful to hear. If you look at the total market cap of platinum group metals, about 1.2 trillion. It's really hard to break that down into what is store of wealth, what is saved, what is used, what is commoditized, what is recycled. So that's the best answer I can give you as we continuously look at this market. But I'll say it this way. It's worth a shitload of money. And that's only one of the markets we're looking at as we go into it. It's obviously the one we're starting out with. There's a lot of other options we have as we go out there.
Okay, well, let's talk about what's changed, right? You were on the show July 2023. So not super long ago, but would just love to hear sort of how I think last time we spoke, you guys were planning mission 1 and 2, but had not yet launched mission 1. I think mission 1 was going to be a transporter mission that fall, if memory serves me correctly. But maybe just in your words, tell us, what's happened since then.
I'll give you that. We did launch mission 1 last time we talked. We hadn't found mission 1 yet, so we had launched on transporter 7. It was in low Earth orbit, and anybody that knows launches on transporters, they send out a shitload of satellites, and you got to figure out, rule number 1 is like, which one is mine, especially when you're a tiny little CubeSat, and where are we going? And that took us a lot more time than we liked. We wrote a whole blog post on mission number 1. Mission 1 had sense of challenges, right? But mission 1 for my company was, I probably should have done a better job from a PR perspective talking about this, because mission 1 intent wasn't really to do anything. Mission 1's intent was, out of everybody here, me and Jose have launched things to space. Nobody else has. So how do you train a company to go do that? Well, you just go launch things to space. And what's the best way to do that? Buy a CubeSat slot on a transporter mission. You go through all the testing campaigns. You go through integration on the rocket. You really understand timelines and launch. It was also to test out our vendors and really understand who can we work with when it comes to communication with this, who can we not. I think last time we had talked about, I was still using the thesis of the company that I was going to horizontally integrate the company and not vertically integrate it, because I thought that there was so much essentially VC dollars in space that was still a plausible way to go. I'll tell you today that thesis was completely wrong, and we have totally gone 180 degrees on that. And with Mission 2, it was the same thing. We were using a vendor to build our satellite bus, and it became really clear to me that wasn't going to be a path to success. So, those are the hard times where you got to call the company together and say, like, hey, we fucked this up. This isn't going to work. The people we trusted are not going to deliver. So now it's back on us. Like, let's go make it happen. But, we made that call in March when we failed vibe test. And we have now completely rebuilt Odin, every component on that vehicle except Sam's propulsion system. Like, I'm going to give all the credit to Dawn in the world. They have been a great company to work with. We either bought or brought in for mission number 3 right away and built that craft up. So the craft you're seeing, the craft that we eventually on August 1st went back through Vibe with, passed Vibe, went through TVAC with, and have done all this stuff with, that craft was built in about 4 months. That's not a short amount of time to build a spacecraft. Just from an industry perspective, and there's no shortcuts to doing that. What it really means is that the team worked a year in 4 months. We've all been here every single weekend, every single night. We run multiple shifts. Like, it's just 24/7. That's the only way you kind of make things like this happen. But those have been the huge changes since we talked last. Saying some of the other stuff, obviously the refinery we made a lot of progress on. We now have it under the power budget we need as we go forward. And most limitations on the refinery now have been that we remove too much material and we just totally screw up our vacuum chambers with pollutants.
So the second spacecraft, Odin, you said earlier this year in March failed vibe testing, but you've since rebuilt it and passed vibe testing in August.
Yes, correct.
And how much of that how much of Odin was built in house versus the previous sort of strategy of horizontal?
Yeah, I would say from a component level, about 50% of the components are built in-house, 50% of the components are bought. I don't know if we'll ever publicly talk about which ones, but anybody in the space industry can probably guess. There's some really easy to buy off-the-shelf stuff that has short lead times, and there's stuff that doesn't, which means you get to roll your own. We rebuilt the entire structure right as we went through. And then again, the propulsion system is supplied by Dawn, which is a huge benefit for us. That's from a mass perspective, still a large percentage of the vehicle. So that was a big help. But we restarted from scratch on the entire structure, all power management systems, the imagers and flight computers. We've always built in house and will continue to. And then a lot of the other stuff from there we purchased.
So is the plan for Odin to image an asteroid, or is there more?
Yeah, Odin will be the first privately funded deep space mission ever attempted in history. We will go around the moon, go out to the asteroid. We want to take beautiful high-resolution images about it. And then we want to stay in space for an additional 2 years to really test the radiation factors of the spacecraft and see how it fails. Also, we want to stay in space for a while because when you're 7 million miles away from Earth, you don't have a great downlink. And so, we're sending back. I mean, we measure our bandwidth in bits per second. And there's no acronym in front of that. Like, it is extremely slow data transfer that comes back.
One thing we didn't actually talk about is how do you decide? How did you decide which asteroids to go after? Obviously, you've done some type of mapping of the material composition of these asteroids, but I'm sure there's a sweet spot analysis of something that's close enough that also meets your composition criteria. How did you choose, and how are you thinking about sort of the general landscape of asteroids near Earth?
Yeah, I'll first say, first thing is, I have no idea about asteroids, right? Like, this is not my bread and butter. Like, yeah, we built stuff for space before. I've worked at these companies Jose has, but when it comes to rocks in the sky, I don't know much. So we really hired one of the best people, which is a guy named Scott Pearl out of JPL. He was there for 20 years as a planetary geologist to help us with this. And then one of our biggest advisors, right, is Lindy out of ASU and the head of NASA's Psyche mission to an M-type asteroid. And between both of them, they're the ones that help curate that list, really help us understand which one to go to, how we look at it. But to answer your question, how we do it, a couple of things. We look at albedo measurements off the asteroid, right? We want to really understand that. We want to understand density as best we can. Density is probably one of the largest indicators of exactly what type of asteroid it is. There's a couple other things that I'll keep a little bit closer to the chest we look at on these asteroids to make sure that we have very high likelihood they're M-type. And obviously, the mapping we get in telescopes can take images and update ephemeris data and really help us understand where they are in the night sky. And for what is down now to 4 targets that we're looking at for the launch coming up, we have some telescope tasking to do. We'll get additional images and bring that down even more and hopefully get us some better data. And then I'll say, Mo, I think from my perspective, this is a really high chance of getting to an M-type. It is not a 100% chance. Keep in mind, we've never been to one. We've never taken really up-close, high-resolution images of really, really small M-types. I think the only one we even have multi-pixel images is of Cleopatra, which is in the main belt. So at some point here, this is probably one of the biggest risks of the company, is are we correct about the type of asteroid we're going to, and are we able to find it? And we'll see with mission 2 if we're right.
Got it. And when will mission 2 complete? Outside of, I know you mentioned 2 years in addition, but sort of your core mission objectives.
Yeah, we're going to have pictures of the asteroid by next summer.
Okay. And then what is the plan for mission 3? Because I know you're already, you're obviously already planning that one.
Yeah, mission 3, it's a cool mission because we have a little bit more time to make some of the design decisions we want to. Not a lot of time, but a little bit more time, right? So mission number 3 is going to go back to the same asteroid and we'll land on it and use it'll do 2 things. First, it will fly alongside it with the gamma ray spectrometer and get a really good mapping of the concentration of what ends up being nickel in the asteroid, which you can correlate very, very well to the platinum group metals in the asteroid at a pretty good surface depth. And then we will land on it and do. We're looking at, it looks like it's going to be Raman spectrometry that wins to do this, but we will sit there and take a direct sample of the surface to understand exactly what the concentrations of platinum group metals are in that asteroid. So that's what missions number 3 tasking and goal is to go do. Mission number 3 has some changes on it, right? Number 1, it's going to go to EP, so electric propulsion, which is, from a modeling standpoint, actually much more difficult to model, but we now have the right heads in house to make that happen and do it. And it'll be the first deployment of the solar panels, which will be larger for the refinery, essentially, as we look at it. So that's what mission 3 will do.
And mission 3 timeline?
Mission 3 is on Intuitive Machines Launch 3. So,
okay.
As they're a publicly traded company, and I'm always a little concerned that I'm going to go, jail for insider trading, I will say nothing, and you can just look on the website, everybody, and see what data.
Tell me a little bit. So you have multiple missions all doing different things, but tell me about what the general architecture of the end system will look like. Like, what is that system from start to finish, from launching to getting back some type of commodity from one of these asteroids back to Earth? What does that look like?
I mean, I think it's pretty simple. But we go out, land on the asteroid, we refine it on site for about 3 months, and then we send it back to Earth. It's a pretty straightforward way to go look at doing one of these missions. Like, I'm happy to dive into different details about how we're thinking about it. From a macro level, though, it's really that simple. We go out, mine it, and come back to Earth. Like, there's nothing else you can really do here, right? We're not even really capable of going to lunar orbits or low Earth orbits after or anything like that. Like, we have to use direct insertion, slam it in the atmosphere, recover the metals. That's how we plan on doing it.
Well, and material processing?
Material processing is done with our refinery. That's a big proprietary piece of information of the company. We filed some patents on it. Essentially, that refinery at the end of the day, I mean, the best way I would ask you to think about it, we post some pictures of this all the time, right? It's essentially a heating element, a laser that comes down, removes material from an asteroid, and we separate out platinum from all the other shit on the asteroid and keep what's worth a lot of money. I mean, I'm keeping it very high level, obviously, but that is what we spend a lot of time figuring out the details for, and we've now got it under the power budget we need to make this realistic on a very small spacecraft on an asteroid 7 million miles away.
There are obviously numerous technical challenges here, but if you could point to one or two, what would you consider to be the most significant technical challenge that you guys are facing between now and when you land on an asteroid?
I actually, this is an interesting one. I'd say I'll break this up a little differently. I don't think there's any physics challenges here. Like, we understand everything as we go through here. There's execution risk. But without execution risk, what are you even doing in a company, right? That sounds really boring to me. And there's financing risk. And I think those are the two real buckets we look at. Like, we can trade capital for less risk at every step of the way. So if we don't like the way this is going, we put more capital into it, right? And we know that at the end, if you want to have essentially a zero risk mission, we know how much that costs. It costs $5 billion and it's called the Psyche mission, right? Like, so we're somewhere on that line. We want to be a lot more to the left. Obviously, we have a business case we got to maintain and go through that. So I'll say this question a little bit differently. I think you're asking is what is the hardest part of this mission? I think the true hardest part of this mission is understanding the delineation between cost and radiation tolerance and how we do that. We have shown through testing that a lot of the things that we assumed on radiation and how we could build it have just shown in tests to be incorrect. And the real way you do this is you just test the shit out of it. What did we miss? What did we get wrong? And what is the component? What is the little simple component that's going to fail? That's going to bring down this mission as we go forward. We are a single redundant vehicle, or we have a single. Sorry, we're a two-string vehicle, so we can handle one failure at any point in the spacecraft, which is great. Cool. That's probably going to give us enough time to realize what went wrong. But if we mess something up or we get a piece wrong, a spacecraft may get into deep space and fail very quickly. So that's probably the biggest risk. And again, we know how to solve that, right? You can go buy all radiation tolerant components or radiation spec components. You're dealing with much worse microprocessors. You're dealing with a lot more cost, and that thing can just explode in cost. So it's this balance of capital versus risk that is the real kicker of a company like this. And we lean on risk. I mean, this is a high risk, high reward company. I tell everybody that comes here, like, don't come here if you expect to work here in 20 years. This is the wrong place to be. Like, we're going to know what's going to happen. In the next 5 years, you're going to know if this is like one of the most successful companies ever, or we're idiots and we go bankrupt. It's going to be one of those two.
I want to push on this cost and risk piece. So, we're talking about mission. You mentioned, obviously, like, physics is not what worries you because we've done this before. And I agree with you. We have done this before. Obviously, government agencies have been doing it or have done it, but at very, very high cost, right? So I want to challenge, or at least push on a little bit, this assumption that yes, the physics challenge is somewhat solved, but it's been with these massive budgets that they've been solved. What makes you so confident, or like, what makes your architecture better in the way that you can now do this for, you mentioned tens of millions of dollars, right? Maybe talk a little bit about that trade-off.
Yeah. So I'll try to dive into some examples here that maybe are a little bit more helpful. Let's look at a Psyche mission and its test campaign that it went through, and this multi-year test campaign that it goes through, looking at every single thing. If you look
and by the way, Matt, sorry, I'll say one thing, which is like, look, we've spent here at the company, we've spent a lot of time looking at various like performance to cost ratios over time of various types of technologies, not just space technologies, like just general sort of technologies that have been fundamental to the way we do business and the way we live our lives. And we have an understanding of like, what that improvement looks like. And of course, a huge amount of that improvement, especially in space, has occurred from the shift in government taking on innovation to allowing private companies and startups to take that bet on innovation. But what you're telling me is a huge improvement, like more so than ones that we've looked at. And so that's why I'm more so asking, like, what is the unlock that you've unlocked that allows you to drop the cost so significantly?
I mean, I don't think, I get you. And if you were to ever look at companies, whenever you look at revolutionary companies, they're not going to usually fall into this framework of risk-adjusted return as you're kind of describing it in a way, Mo. I mean, I'll draw this analogy back to Falcon 1. When Falcon 1 was going off, I knew a lot of people at ULA. I remember talking to them. And I mean, you're talking $400 million to a rocket that was going to cost $10 million. Like, that was the price difference between a Delta IV and a Falcon 1. And, everybody at that time said, these guys are idiots. There's no way they can do this. This can't happen, blah, blah, blah. And guess what? They made it happen. And what did they do to look at it differently there? Well, it's kind of the same thing we're doing. Like, go question everything. I mean, there's a document called SMC 0016, and it'll tell you how to test the rocket. Right? It'll tell you how to build every component, test the rocket, and go through it. But if you really sit there and go, why? You can get rid of a lot of that testing. And even today, like when we build rockets, we don't do salt fog testing for the most part, right? Or we'll skip a lot of these things as we go forward. It's the same thing for spacecraft. Why do you do a lot of this testing, right? Why do we do we do vibe testing because we need to for SpaceX to get through. We do TVAC because we think there is an added risk with some of the epoxies we're using, and we want to make sure that the thermal models are correct, and as we go through, and so we do that. Everything else we've thrown away and said, we're going to go test it in space. Like, go test, just go launch it. And at this price point, we can take that risk to go launch it. So fundamentally, what becomes different is our mission success profile is a lot less. And I think the problem you've seen in space is that space is low volume. And so I'll give you an example. When we build Ford F-150s, right? probably the first 100 Ford F-150s that pull off the plant for any given year are all broken and don't work, and they send a whole bunch of techs out and they iterate on it very quickly, and they get up to good production. You see this on every production car. You probably even heard this when you buy a production car. They'll say, don't buy the first model year. Why? Because there's all these little issues that got to be worked out in the next model years and go through. And you can solve that through volumetric production. Space is one-offs. So instead of doing that through volumetric production, we do that through testing to buy down risk on the avenue. What if you don't? What if you just go back to that volume way? And for us, when we look at the long term of this company, we'd be a very high volume company. Yeah, we're taking a lot more risk on these initial missions, but that's how we plan to do it. And that's the only way we can get there for the price we're doing. Again, I mean, these aren't made up numbers in any way because they're happening, right? But later this year when we launch, this total mission cost will be under $7 million. Like if we make it to deep space, Mo, and if we are successful in this, that's a revolutionary price point for what we can do, not only for the way that asteroid mining can look, I think for science as a whole. Like for so many times you hear all these scientists at APL and JPL and all these places go like, I wish I could do X, I wish I could do Y, I wish I could launch my instrument. And their way to do that now is, look, NASA built a CubeSat called Janus for $55 million. Like what? I don't even like, and that was one of their low cost missions. Like in whose realm is that low cost? What if we can do this and support a platform for much, much less? Like, I think the risk reward here is just too big to not take a goal at it. And the reality is, Mo, yeah, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm totally wrong. We launch this thing and it fails 5 seconds after launch. Okay. I'm still going to sit here in front of you and say, I'm willing to take the risk and I'm willing to see if we can change the industry as a whole. And I think that's worth spending every waking minute of to try to make a change there.
So you mentioned 7 million. Just to be clear, did you mean under? So is that the cost for mission 2? So up to mission 2, or are you including mission 3 in that?
Mission 2, the complete cost with launch is under $7 million.
Okay, got it. Okay, I'm going to come back to economics in just a second because I do want to talk about long-term economics. But can we talk about regulation real quick? So what is the current state of regulation towards mining anything outside of Earth, and how do you expect that to evolve?
This is one I really owe to the Planetary Resources guy because they spent a whole bunch of time in Congress getting this passed. I mean, we have the 2015 Space Act that went through with Ted Cruz that says clear as day, commercial companies, private companies in the United States can mine asteroids and sell the material for profit. Great. So I think from a regulatory standpoint, we are starting off with the burden of proof here on the regulatory front. It's a great place to be. And from my perspective, I don't have a ton of concerns about the regulation. Now, the UN has some very ambiguous laws from the Outer Space Treaty. They talk about safety keep-out zones. They talk about some of this other stuff. The one line they come in there, and keep in mind, like one thing that's great is the legal community loves to talk with us about this because it's a very fun thing for, I think, to go over. So we get a lot of free advice on this. From the legal standpoint, there is a line in there that says like you essentially can't use space resources for war. This is a big reason why we just sell to final refineries, because why violate UN law or why even mess with it when we don't really need to? We don't need to go direct. We can go through these final refining areas. So from a regulatory standpoint, I don't see any issues here as we go forward. Let's be honest, though, Mo. If we do hit our goal of completely removing precious metal mining from Earth, you're damn right people are going to try to regulate this or make up new rules or go through it. And so we'll stay on top of that. But I think we got some proof points to hit first. And I spend all my waking moments trying to de-risk mission 2 and make sure mission 3 is right behind it.
Do you have a sense of how other countries are viewing asteroid mining? So, for example, China. I read once that there was some political document that came from the Chinese government that talked about how they sort of estimate that the cislunar economy, or sort of the zone between Earth and the Moon, is a multi-trillion-dollar a year economic ROI. Now, obviously, those are very big numbers, and a lot of that is based upon their perspective on the commodities and what can be extracted in terms of resources from that zone. But I'm curious if you have any more kind of data points or anything more finer around the way international other countries are viewing asteroid mining.
I'm glad to hear that countries think about it like I hear startups pitch it all the time, which is like, it's going to be worth trillions and trillions of dollars. And I just go back and be like, well, how much was it worth last year? Which I'm pretty sure the answer was $0. But China makes a big push here. Our biggest competitor is a company called Origin Space in China, which has been, it's not like, now don't get me wrong, it's not like you can go on PitchBook and look up Origin Space, right? It's not like you get all these details. China has a big play in critical and precious metals. And they've made this pretty clear. I mean, you've seen the laws come in place on some of them. You've seen them ban some of the, I believe they banned a rare earth metal, a small market cap. They've made some plays here, and they're not shy about it. In fact, the biggest platinum mines in South Africa have strong Chinese influence as we go into this. So it's not a joke to China. China's putting a lot of resources into it. I mean, China has, when you look at a company like Origin Space, what we've been able to find, it looks like they were awarded 3 heavy lift launches, direct insertion by China. Value those at what you will. I don't know how to value those, but I wish the U.S. government would give me 3 heavy lift free launches. That'd be pretty cool. As we go out there. So they're clearly making big plays here. They clearly care a lot, and I think they have a really good chance to win. Let's not sugarcoat it, right? They're pushing the envelope on what they can do and how. But I think what they're really pushing, and I think this is what people don't understand, China is not pushing how much they can do. They're pushing risk, right? They're taking more risk than anybody else. I mean, we all love to talk shit about them 6 months ago when I don't know what rocket it was, but you saw it, all these hypergolics coming out and this red stuff going in the forest. It was like, oh, that's so toxic. Yeah, but you know what China did? They took the risk to launch it. And I'm not saying that's the right risk. I'm not saying we should go kill people. Don't get me wrong. China's a lot more risk tolerant than the U.S. is at this point. I think that's what made the U.S. great when we did the first space races. We were able to accept risk. We knew as an astronaut, there's probably a high likelihood you're going to die on one of these missions, and you're still willing to go do it. I mean, go read, Alan Shepard's book where he talks about the first Redstone launch and how much risk he took in that launch. He wanted to launch before we had ever even sent a Redstone successfully to space. Like, it's just crazy what these guys are willing to take on. I think China is now the embodiment of that spirit, and the U.S. has lost that a little bit. So I think they're a real competitor. I think they're making some huge strides, and I think it's someone that if we want to compete, you're going to have to take a little more risk than everybody else is willing to take.
Right. No, I get that, and I agree. I want to talk about long-term economics real quick. So, you mentioned $7 million for mission 2. Let's say that mission 3, mission 4, whichever asteroid, whichever mission that you feel like ultimately will get you to the asteroid with confidence, and you find the right asteroid, right? Not only do you land on the asteroid, but you find the right asteroid to be able to actually mine material. Let's just say it costs, I don't know, 20 million, just making that up, 10, 20 million. Can you walk us through those first couple missions? Are those meant to be break-even missions? Are you going to be generating substantial revenue? Like, I know you have $8 billion of contracts you've mentioned that you've signed with various players who would buy commodities from you. Maybe give us a sense of scale of what the economics of a mission looks like.
Yeah, for sure. I will say that return mass we can bring down, and the most we'll be able to bring down is about 1,200 kilograms. We have a very specific breakdown of the PGMs that we expect to see on the asteroid, and we've done some big studies on this. And I'll give you a little bit of a range to keep it ambiguous. It's anywhere between $60 and $100 million that we return in metals per mission as we bring it back in today's current market. So to give you a sense, that's what we're looking at as a return. Per mission. Yes, per mission. When it comes to, and I won't talk about mission number 4, but I'll talk about mission number 3. Mission number 3 is less than $10 million all in. That's including communication with the vehicle over the 2-year life cycle of the vehicle, right, as we go out for mission number 3. Now, it's a little bit different mission, right? It has a little bit different constructs there as we go forward. But I think you can infer how big the margins are as we go forward. And these are on real missions today with real contracts. This isn't, I hope to God Starship works. I hope Blue Origin figures out how to launch a rocket. It looks like they're finally making some progress on those fronts. And those are all just big benefits for us. I also hope, Stoke, I think, is an amazing company. If they can figure out how to do it, like, there's all these kind of influx and launch that any of them can be a tipping point to actually make this cost less for us. But in today's money, we're still under $10 million for even a mission number 3. And I think that's a big key point of the company is, and I really run that fact into everybody every day, is like, this shit has to be cheap. We're not going to make it, like, you're not going to build a Europa Clipper $5 billion and bring back $100 million in metal. Like, that makes no sense. And I think that's where a lot of people have got this wrong. The biggest thing we have to do is take higher risk to save money on the spacecraft and make it cheap. There's no frills on these spacecraft. They are not scientific spacecraft, right? Like, it's a Psyche with no scientific shit on it. That's pretty much what these missions are.
Right. How much capital have you raised so far? So the Series A was about 40 million.
Yeah, we've raised just over, I actually need to go look at this number directly. It's right over 55 million.
Got it. Okay. And then what are the plans with the Series A proceeds? Like, does this get you to comfortably through mission 3 and 4? Or like, when do you think you'll need to raise capital again?
This gets us comfortably through mission 3. So on the current
Got it.
launch windows with the current schedules, this gets us the results from mission number 3. As we go forward, it also helps us really with, I talk a lot about the refinery on this. We've made a bunch of huge strides there, but the refinery is still a lab equipment, right? It is not a compact form that can be sent to space. And so part of this is also taking that and making sure we can transport that to space.
Talking to investors, what are common misconceptions from investors? And I know we've talked about a number of them already, but what are common misconceptions from investors around your business and your model that you've heard and that maybe, you want to address right now we have a large investor audience that listens to this show. I'm kind of curious, for those folks who might be thinking, or, listening to the show or thinking about asteroid mining or thinking about it seriously, what are common misconceptions that you've heard that you feel like, hey, if you just know this going into it, it changes your perspective on what this business can be?
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't think that we thought about a business at all. A lot of times you get on the call, and I think there is a lot of space companies out there, and I never want to bash another space company. So many of them, like I said, they just don't follow some fundamental rules of business, which is you better have a big market, you better have big margins. If you don't have those, what the hell are you doing, right? There's no point. Nobody cares that you can break even or that your sole customer is the government. That's not a real venture backable startup. I think what it has become for investors is a safe startup. And you're seeing this a lot. You're seeing a lot of companies that get quite a bit in government contracts will get pretty big investments from people. And the reason for that is pretty simple in my mind. It won't go to zero. It might not go to $1 trillion, but it's not going to go to zero. That's fine. And I think there's nothing wrong with making money off that or getting a 2 or 3x multiple or whatever you guys want to do. Have fun. That's not what you're investing in AstroForge. What you're investing in AstroForge is a different future, right? A different place that I want to live where all of the destructive processes we do on Earth are off-world. And I think you can see how this is a massive company we're trying to build. This is not a small swing. If we are successful, I firmly believe this will be the largest company ever created, right? We're now mining the universe for its resources. This is a different type of play that we're going after. At the same time, the early unit economics make a lot of sense. Our margins are extremely high, right? They're between 85 and 90%, depending on which margin you look at, completely broken down. And that's as a mining company. That's where you want to start off. So I'd say that's the number one thing that I think investors always have a misconception of. There's always the question about the market, and there's always this question. One of the biggest things too I get from investors, because investors love to think about the future, is that electric vehicles are taking over the world, and that all the catalyst and platinum group prices are going to crater because it's all used in catalytic converters. Well, there's a couple things totally wrong with that statement. Number one is, go look at any charts as of the last 6 months. Electric cars are not taking over the world. In fact, you can make an argument they've plateaued and in some cases maybe even seem to have declining rates on them. Number one. Number two is what's actually taking over the world is hybrids. They've had substantial growth rates over the last really 2 years. And we're having a whole bunch more regulation put in on the car industry. China just introduced its first, what are called the Cat 6 Chinese regulations that mandate now catalytic converters. Their heavy trucks are going to hit a huge regulation increase in 2 years, and that's a huge polluter for us. These prices are just going the other way. So I think people love to, in the venture world, think that everything they invest in is going to take over the world and be it. But sometimes, again, I very much mean this, Mo, is a lot of times the way I gut check myself is just go look at the last year. The last year will tell you that's the best predictor of the future. Just go understand that. When you go look at that, you see a huge demand here forming in platinum in this grouping of metals, and that's what we want to go after. And the last one, which is my favorite, is, if you're listening, Ben Affleck, I'm ready to accept your angel investment. People always ask me about fucking Ben Affleck and where he is and if Armageddon's coming back. That's the number one reference I get, and I can't anymore. But
right.
Those are the misconceptions. There's no people on this mission, just so everybody knows. You don't have to, they don't fit in a 100 kilogram spacecraft.
By the way, one thing I actually meant to ask you earlier, government contracts. Do you have any government contracts or most of those dollars tied to commercial entities?
No, look, we are a commercial company. I'm not, I can rant all day about this dual use stuff that I don't actually think exists. I think the only dual use company is actually Apple because military buys laptops too. Your cruise missile is not a dual use company. Can we please stop pretending it is? Number one. And number two is government contracts are not this non-dilutive capital. Because people love this word and that's just not fucking true. Unless you don't value your time at all. This stuff is hugely time dilutive. So do we have government contracts? Yes, we have 2. They're very small ones, and they're very intentional to give us a customer inside some of these markets so that we get access to some equipment and more importantly, some dishes that we need access to. But we're very limited on them, and unless we see them as a way to directly compete or be on track with our mission, they're just not something we want to go after. And so we're very selective in what we do on the government side. And that's just how I see it. Look, we're either going to fail as an asteroid mining company or be successful as an asteroid mining company. I'm sure as hell not going to become Boeing 2.0, and I have no vision to become Boeing 2.0. And if you want to invest in Boeing 2.0, Anduril's like 20 minutes that way, and I think they're on their way to do it. You should go invest in them.
What is your vision for the company long term? Let's push out a decade or two. Let's just say that you have brought back, or you are bringing back PGMs from asteroids, and you're selling them for market price, and you have these great margins. What is the long term vision of the business?
I mean, the long term vision here is pretty straightforward. I want to make precious metal mining illegal on the face of the earth. I want to completely remove this. There's no reason we should be doing that here if asteroid mining is possible and economical to go do. It produces about 2.5% of global emissions. It kills hundreds of people every year. There's all this water waste. You dig these big ass holes in the ground. This is not an industry that I think we want to keep going. And it just keeps getting worse and worse as the ore gets deeper and harder to find. And we can have some stopgaps in there. Maybe we'll find a little bit here or there, but the process for how platinum is created and formed doesn't yield to us finding more in the way we think about it. In fact, the biggest theory right now is that all the platinum mines we use are actually asteroid impacts. And so long-term vision of the company is make it illegal to do the current way of mining. And that's what we want to do. So I guess that's the best way I can describe it.
So spending so much time on mining, I am curious, how has that changed your perspective on, humanity's options if a asteroid ever comes? We talk about, you hear a lot about how we're overdue for a extinction level event like an asteroid. I'm curious if that's, you mentioned Armageddon. How do you think about our options these days, and are enough people working on the problem to, or what I should say, are enough folks? Do we have enough expertise to deal with it if it ever came up? I know this is not your business, but I'm curious to get your perspective.
You're talking to the guy who would save the world. But also, maybe that'll be my first big government contract. All jokes aside, look, the reality is if we discover that there's an asteroid coming at us at a high rate of speed that we need to divert pretty far out, here's your options. You can go to JPL and ask them to build the Europa Clipper, and it'll take 20 years. And by that time, the asteroid will have hit the Earth and we'll all have died. Or you can come talk to us, who will be the only other people to be able to operate in deep space very, very quickly, right? And I think what it's all about is speed. And anytime you see these technical advancements, it's about speed. And so, there's a whole bunch of people that study this. We have a whole planetary defense run by Lindy Johnson. These are great, super amazing scientists. I don't think the engineering is there to do it. And so I think leveraging them with a company like ours who can actually produce a vehicle or produce a way to go put whatever device or whatever subsystem you're going to use to divert that asteroid, it's probably the only chance we have. If one's coming. But also, let's be honest about this. Yeah, we're within the probability of the next one coming. Those 1 sigma values are measured in millions of years. So I think, it's one of these things where I don't spend any time thinking about it. It's not really that big of an issue to me. And I think we're going to have a Apophis fly by in 2029. There is a chance that it does impact on the next thing coming by, and that would kind of suck. That gives us 15 years to figure out a safe part of the planet.
Yeah, that's actually the one that I saw recently that made me think about this. Let's hope that we don't need that, at least not in our generation. So,
go ahead.
No, I was going to just ask. You mentioned Ben Affleck, but just to close this out here, who's playing you in the movie about AstroForge?
Oh, who's playing me in the movie? Yeah. That's a better answer if I actually had any time to watch movies anymore or even look at the TV. I don't know, probably the best looking Hollywood A-lister at the time, which I don't know who that is anymore. I guess Brad Pitt's kind of old now, so that probably doesn't work. Yeah, that's a terrible answer because I actually don't know any modern actors that I can even list you from, but I guarantee you he's beautiful.
It's funny. I've asked this question a number of times already on the show, and people can't come up with actors or actresses. And I'm like, is this the wrong question? Are we that, are space founders that out of touch with pop culture?
Yes, Mo. To be clear, yes. But also, like, who am I going to say? Like, shitty Adam Driver? Like, I hate that guy. I don't even know. Like, what? Like, I have 3 kids now. All the movies I watch are like these fucking animated movies that I want to sleep through, right? Like, I've seen Moana 100 times. I don't even know who sings in that movie, right? So, like, for me, it's just been, yeah, I don't know.
It'll be some AI after, I'm sure, by then. But in any case, Matt, thanks so much for being on the show. It's a pleasure to have you back. Super interesting, super exciting, and we'll obviously be watching very closely on the progress and all the things that you're doing. So I'm excited to have you back again. Maybe we can think about penciling
Let's
something
do it
in
live
for mission 3.
Room. I mean, we're gonna live stream mission number 2, 100%. Like, all channels are gonna be online. So, like, I'm happy to have you here, and we can just you can see success or failure as it happens.
That sounds like a great idea. I'll take you up on that.
Awesome. Thanks, Mo.
All right. Thanks, Matt.